The Wyoming wind, sharp as a new knife, whipped around Alara's small cabin, but she barely noticed. It was 1884, and the land was as wild as the stories told about it. Alara was a woman who matched the land's spirit. She was taller than most men, with shoulders broad enough to carry a heavy log. Her hands, calloused and strong, had tilled more dirt and lifted more bales than any two men in the valley. Her husband, Thomas, had been a kind man, but even he had sometimes seemed small next to her towering frame. Now he was gone, and Alara was left alone with her land and her quiet strength. When Alara rode into town, a hush would fall over the dusty Main Street. Children would stop their games, their eyes wide with a mix of wonder and fear. Shopkeepers would eye her from behind their counters, their smiles stiff and quick. She rarely spoke, not because she was unkind, but because words often felt clumsy in her mouth. Actions, she believed, spoke louder, but her silence, combined with her great size, made folks uneasy. They whispered about her in the saloon, calling her the giantess or old man Thomas's shadow. They said she was too big, too strong, not like a proper woman. Alara felt their stares, their hushed words, like tiny pebbles thrown at her back. She pretended not to notice, keeping her gaze steady on the path ahead. She knew what they thought, that she was strange, that her strength was unnatural. They saw her size, but they didn't see the gentle heart beneath her rough exterior. They saw her silence, but they didn't hear the quiet songs she sang to herself as she worked her fields. One afternoon, she needed to buy flour and sugar. As she walked past the general store, a group of men stood outside, laughing loudly. Their laughter died as she approached. One man, Red Larkin, a known troublemaker, nudged his friend. "Look there, boys," he slurred. "It's Alara. Don't she look like she could wrestle a bear?" His friends chuckled nervously, but Red, fueled by too much whiskey, grew bolder. "Maybe she's the bear," he yelled, and the laughter grew louder, though it was still shaky. Alara paused. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look at them. She simply kept walking, her boots crunching on the gravel. She knew fighting with words was useless. She had learned long ago that some people would never understand. They would only see what they wanted to see. A big, fearsome woman, not a lonely widow trying to make her way in a harsh world. She bought her supplies quickly, paid with the coins she'd earned through sheer grit, and left the town as swiftly as she could, the whispers following her like shadows. The townsfolk were scared of her, and in their fear, they misunderstood everything about Alara. Back on her ranch, Alara's cabin was a small, sturdy island in a sea of grass and sky. Here, away from the judging eyes of town, she found a different kind of peace, though it was often touched by loneliness. Every morning, before the sun fully climbed over the distant mountains, Alara was already at work. Her days were a long, hard dance with the land. She mended fences that the harsh winter winds had torn down, her strong hands expertly twisting wire. She chopped wood, the rhythmic thud of her axe echoing across the quiet prairie. She tended to her small herd of cattle, making sure they were fed and safe. This land was hers, a legacy from Thomas, and she was fiercely determined to keep it. It was a promise she'd made to him and to herself. Every nail hammered, every furrow plowed was a testament to her strength and her love for what they had built together. Sometimes, as she worked, her mind would drift back to Thomas. She remembered his quiet laughter, the way his hand felt in hers, even though her hand was much larger. A soft ache would settle in her chest, a reminder of the warmth he had brought into her life. She missed him terribly, especially in the long, silent evenings when the only sounds were the wind and the distant cries of coyotes. But even with the sadness, there was a deep well of pride within Alara. She was doing it. She was keeping their dream alive, alone. Her muscles ached at the end of each day, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from honest labor. She looked at her fields, green and growing, and a quiet satisfaction filled her. This was her strength, not just the power in her arms, but the strength of her will, her spirit. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, Alara sat on her porch. She watched a hawk circle high above, its keen eyes searching the land below. Just like that hawk, she watched over her ranch, ever vigilant. She had built the cabin with Thomas, board by board, nail by nail. The small garden near the door, with its sturdy rows of vegetables, was her creation. Every part of this place held a piece of her heart, a memory of a shared life, and a symbol of her enduring independence. She knew the townspeople saw her as a strange, formidable figure. They didn't see her weary smile as a calf nudged her hand, or the way she carefully mended a torn page in Thomas's old book. They didn't see the quiet dignity with which she carried her burdens. They certainly didn't see the pride she felt in her own two hands, hands that could build, mend, and protect. It was a lonely life, yes, but it was her asterisk life, and she lived it with an unshakable resolve. Her strength was not just a physical trait, it was the very backbone of her existence on this wild Wyoming land. She was a fortress not just of stone and wood, but of spirit. One evening, as the last sliver of sun dipped below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in deep purples and bruised oranges, Alara was finishing her chores. She had just secured the chicken coop when she heard the distant thud of horses' hooves. It wasn't the steady, familiar trot of a lone rider. This was a ragged thunder, too many horses, too fast for a friendly visit. A knot tightened in her stomach. Trouble, she knew, often rode in numbers. 6 riders burst into view, kicking up dust as they reined in their horses roughly near her cabin. Their faces were shadowed by wide-brimmed hats, but Alara recognized Red Larkin, the loudmouth from town, in the lead. The other men were just as rough-looking, their eyes glinting with an ugly mix of greed and liquor. They dismounted with swaggering movements, their spurs jingling loudly in the quiet evening. "Well, well, well," Red slurred, his voice thick with drink, "look what we have here. The giantess herself, all alone on her little patch of dirt." He grinned, a nasty twist of his lips. "Heard you've been having trouble keeping this land, Alara. A woman alone, it's a hard life, ain't it?" Alara stood tall, her shadow stretching long behind her in the fading light. She didn't speak, just watched them, her hands hanging loosely at her sides, ready. She knew why they were here. Her land, fertile and well-watered, was a prize. With Thomas gone, they thought it would be easy to scare her off, to claim it for themselves. They saw her as a lonely widow, a woman who would crumble under pressure. They thought her size was just a novelty, not a source of power. Another man, thin and mean-eyed, stepped forward. "We're here to help you move along, ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "This here land, it needs a man's touch, and you ain't no man." His friends snickered, emboldened by his words. Red Larkin took another step closer, his hand going to the pistol at his hip. "You got a choice, Alara. You can pack your things and ride out quietly, or we can make you leave. And trust me, you don't want us to make you leave." He smirked, confident in their numbers, 6 men against 1 woman, even a big one. It was a sure thing in their minds. They had underestimated her, thinking her silence meant weakness, her solitary life meant she had no fight left. They believed she was just a woman, easy to push around, easy to scare away from her home. They were about to learn a very hard lesson. Alara's gaze swept over their faces, taking in their sneering confidence. A cold anger, slow and steady like a river, began to rise within her. This land was Thomas's legacy, her home, her life. She would not give it up. Not to these men, not to anyone. Her quiet strength, so often unseen, was about to be unleashed. Red Larkin took another step, his hand hovering near his pistol. "Last chance, Alara," he sneered, his eyes narrowed. "Walk away from this land, or we'll make you." Alara's eyes, usually soft with quiet sadness, now held a fierce, unyielding fire. She didn't utter a single word. Instead, she slowly lowered her hands, clenching them into fists at her sides. It was a silent challenge, a clear sign that she would not be moved. Her stance was like a mountain, solid and unyielding. Red, mistaking her silence for fear, laughed. "She thinks she's tough, boys. Let's show her what tough really means." He signaled to 2 of his men. They rushed forward, intent on grabbing her arms and dragging her away. But Alara was ready. The moment the first man reached for her, she moved with a speed that belied her size. Her arm shot out, not in a wild swing, but a precise, powerful push. The man, caught off guard, stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet and landing hard in the dust with a grunt. Before the second man could react, Alara spun, her powerful leg sweeping out. It wasn't a kick, but a move meant to unbalance, and it worked. The man lost his footing, flailing his arms before collapsing in a heap beside his friend. The remaining four men, including Red, stared in stunned silence. Their sneers vanished, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. They had expected a scream, a struggle, a quick victory. They had not expected this. "What in tarnation?" one of them mumbled. Red Larkin, his face now pale beneath his beard, finally understood he had made a terrible mistake, but he was too proud and too drunk to back down. "Get her," he roared, drawing his pistol. As he raised the weapon, Alara moved again. This time her movement was a blur of raw power. She lunged, not at Red, but at a discarded fence post lying nearby. With one swift, incredibly strong motion, she scooped it up. It was a thick piece of timber, heavy enough to be a burden for two men. For Alara, it became a shield, then a weapon. She swung the post not to hit, but to create space. The heavy wood whistled through the air, forcing the men to jump back. One man, trying to circle around her, found himself caught by the end of the post as she spun. He yelped as it connected with his side, sending him sprawling. Red fired his pistol, but the shot went wild, embedding itself in the cabin wall as Alara ducked behind the fence post. She advanced, a formidable force, using the post to keep them at bay. Her strength was incredible, her movements fluid and purposeful. She wasn't just big, she was powerful, and she knew how to use it. The men, now thoroughly terrified, began to fall back. They scrambled for their horses, their earlier bravado replaced by sheer panic. "Get out!" Alara's voice, a deep roar that surprised even herself, ripped through the evening air. It was the first word she had spoken, and it carried the weight of her fury. Red Larkin, seeing his men flee, cursed under his breath. He tried to get back on his horse, fumbling with the reins. Alara, with a final, mighty heave, threw the fence post. It didn't hit him, but it landed with a sickening thud right next to his horse's head, spooking the animal. The horse reared, throwing Red to the ground. He scrambled up, abandoning his gun, and clambered onto the nearest horse, galloping away with his tail between his legs, his men scattering behind him like frightened rabbits. Alara watched them go, her chest heaving, the adrenaline coursing through her. Her land was safe. For now. Her amazing strength, so often hidden, had just saved her home. The sun had barely risen the next morning when Red Larkin, bruised and battered, stumbled into the saloon. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a fear that even whiskey couldn't dull. His tale, stammered out between gulps of rotgut, spread through the small town like wildfire. 6 men, all of them rough and armed, had been beaten back by one woman. Alara. At first people laughed. Red Larkin was a liar, a drunk. But then the other 5 men, equally disheveled and spooked, started trickling back into town. Their stories, though less dramatic than Red's, all pointed to the same unbelievable truth. Alara, the quiet widow, had single-handedly driven them from her land. She had knocked men down, swung a fence post like it was a feather, and roared them off her property. A stunned silence fell over the general store, the saloon, and the blacksmith's shop. People gathered in small groups, their voices hushed, their faces etched with disbelief. "She threw him like a sack of potatoes," one man swore, still wide-eyed. "Heard she picked up that fence post with one hand," another added, his voice barely a whisper. The whispers about Alara changed overnight. No longer were they just about her size or her strangeness. Now they were filled with awe and a new kind of fear. The children, who used to simply stare, now spoke of her in hushed, excited tones, making up tales of her wrestling bears and taming wild horses. Some townsfolk were still deeply scared. If she could do that to 6 armed men, what could she do to them if they crossed her? They kept their distance, watching her cabin from afar, imagining her as some kind of mythical beast. But others, a growing number, started to see her differently. The old women, usually the first to gossip, now spoke with a grudging respect. "That woman," Mrs. Henderson, the baker, said, wiping her floury hands on her apron, "she knows how to protect what's hers." "Can't fault her for that." The men who had always dismissed her as just a woman now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had mocked her strength, thinking it was unnatural, but now they saw it as something truly remarkable. A few even felt a pang of shame for their past unkindness. She wasn't just big, she was incredibly powerful, and she had used that power to defend her home against injustice. The story of Alara's fight became the talk of the town, eclipsing all other news. It wasn't just a fight, it was a legend unfolding before their very eyes. They had seen her as an outsider, an oddity, but now they had to reckon with the undeniable truth of her immense strength and courage. It forced them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about Alara, the quiet giantess of the Wyoming plains. The fear hadn't completely vanished, but mixed with it now was a dawning respect, a recognition of something extraordinary. The morning after the fight, a strange quiet hung over Alara's ranch. She moved slowly, her body stiff from the struggle, but her spirit felt lighter. The land was still hers, and she had proven she could defend it. She was mending a broken gate, humming a low tune, when she heard the familiar clip-clop of a single horse approaching. Her hand instinctively went to the heavy wrench she was using. She had no idea who would be brave enough to visit after yesterday's events. As the rider drew closer, Alara recognized him. It was Silas, a rancher from the next valley over. He was a quiet man, known for his honest work and gentle way with animals. He wasn't one of the loud, swaggering types from town. He had always offered a polite nod when they passed on the trail, a rare sign of simple respect. Silas reined in his horse a good distance from the gate, dismounting slowly. He was a tall man himself, though not as powerfully built as Alara, and his movements were thoughtful. He wore a clean, if worn hat, and his eyes, a kind blue, met Alara's directly. There was no fear in them, no shock, just a calm, steady gaze. He had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in the county had by now. But his face showed no hint of the awe or terror that gripped the townsfolk. Instead, his expression was one of quiet admiration. "Morning, Alara," Silas said, his voice soft but clear. He removed his hat, holding it respectfully in his hands. "Heard you had some trouble last night." Alara nodded, tightening a bolt on the gate. She waited, expecting him to ask for details or perhaps to warn her about further trouble. She expected him to keep his distance like all the others, but Silas just looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the strength in her shoulders, the determination in her eyes, the worn calluses on her hands. He saw the integrity of a woman who stood her ground, who protected what was hers with fierce courage. He didn't see a giantess or a freak. He saw Alara. "It takes a brave soul to stand against 6 men," Silas continued, his voice steady, "and a strong one to send them packing." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Most folks, they just see the big picture, they see the fight. But I've always seen how you work this land, Alara, how you keep things going even when it's hard. That takes more than just muscle." Alara finally looked up from her work, meeting his gaze fully. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever acknowledged the quiet, everyday strength that fueled her life, not just the explosive power she'd shown last night. His words were like a warm ray of sunshine breaking through a long, cold winter. It was a recognition that reached deeper than her physical might, touching the very core of her spirit. Silas saw her, not just the stories about her. He saw her with respect, and it felt like a balm to her lonely heart. Alara, still holding the wrench, finally lowered her hands. Her gaze, usually guarded, softened just a touch as she met Silas's kind blue eyes. His words, "That takes more than just muscle," echoed in her mind. It was as if he had seen straight through the rough shell she presented to the world and understood the steady, burning ember of her spirit within. Silas took a step closer, not invading her space but simply making his presence known. "I've seen you, Alara," he said, his voice earnest. "Seen you fixing fences in the dead of winter when no man would dare. Seen you bringing in your hay alone, sweating under the summer sun. You don't just work hard, you work with a purpose, with a love for this land." He gestured around her ranch, a sweeping motion that took in her sturdy cabin, the well-tended fields, the small herd of cattle. "This place, it speaks of you, of your grit, your heart." A flush, faint but real, rose on Alara's cheeks. It had been years since anyone had spoken to her with such warmth and understanding. Thomas had known her, of course, but Silas was a neighbor, someone who had seen her from a distance, yet still saw her true self. "What you did last night," Silas continued, his voice gaining a quiet intensity, "that was more than just strength. That was courage, to stand alone against those men, to fight for what's yours. Most men would run. You stood." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And that, Alara, that makes you special, truly special." All that Ilara's heart, which had felt like a cold, hard stone for so long, began to thaw. She had always thought her strength was a burden, something that set her apart and made her unlovable. The town's mockery had reinforced that belief. But Silas saw it differently. He saw her power as something to admire, her courage as something to cherish. He didn't shy away from her size, he saw the spirit that commanded it. "You're not like anyone else, Alara," Silas said, his gaze unwavering. "And that's a good thing, a very good thing." He smiled then, a gentle, genuine smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. It wasn't a smile of pity or fear, but one of deep respect and honest appreciation. Alara found herself unable to speak. The lump in her throat was too big, made of years of unspoken loneliness and newfound hope. His words were a mirror, showing her a reflection of herself that she had almost forgotten, a reflection of worth and dignity. She realized then that Silas didn't just see her strength, he understood it. He understood that it came from a place of fierce love for her home, her memories, and her own enduring spirit. He saw her as a whole person, not just a collection of unusual parts. He saw her as special, and in that moment she began to believe it too. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the yard, but Alara and Silas stood unmoving, the quiet understanding between them growing stronger than any spoken word. Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't realized she was missing until this very moment. Silas's gentle gaze held hers, and for the first time in a long time she felt truly seen. Silas took a deep breath, his blue eyes still fixed on hers. "Alara," he began, his voice a little softer now, as if carefully choosing each word, "this life out here, it's not meant to be lived alone. It's hard enough with two, let alone one." He paused, then continued, "I've watched you not just for your strength, but for your spirit. You're honest, you're brave, and you're true to yourself. That's a rare thing, Alara, a precious thing." He took another step, closing the small distance between them. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to touch her. His respect was too deep for that. He simply stood before her, open and sincere. "My ranch isn't as big as yours, perhaps," he said, a small, wry smile touching his lips. "But it's a good place, and it's mine, and I find myself thinking that it would be a much better place if you were there, too." He looked directly into her eyes, his sincerity shining. "Alara, I'm not asking you to join your life with mine because you need a man to protect you. You've proven you don't. I'm asking you because I want to share my life with someone strong, someone kind, someone true." He paused, then the words came, clear and steady, like the ringing of a bell in the morning air. "Alara, will you marry me? Will you be my wife?" Alara gasped softly. The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning, yet light with the promise of a future she hadn't dared to dream of. Marry him? The thought was astonishing. She, the mocked giantess, the feared widow, being asked to share a life not out of pity, not out of necessity, but out of genuine admiration and respect. Silas wasn't looking for someone to lean on him. He was looking for someone to stand beside him. He wasn't seeing her as a problem to be solved, but as a partner to be cherished. He saw her strength not as something to be tamed, but as something to be honored. He saw her for who she truly was, a woman of immense spirit, capable of great things and worthy of profound love. His proposal was a testament to her dignity, a recognition of her worth that went far beyond the whispers and judgments of the town. He wanted her, all of her, because she was strong and true. Alara stood frozen, the sound of Silas's proposal ringing in her ears, louder and clearer than any gunshot. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild drumbeat she hadn't felt since Thomas had first asked her to share his life. Surprise, like a sudden gust of wind, swept through her, leaving her breathless. No one. Not in all her years, not since Thomas, had anyone looked at her with such open kindness, such deep understanding. Her eyes, which usually held a distant, watchful look, now shone with unshed tears. She blinked them back, not wanting to appear weak, even to Sila's. But the warmth that spread through her was undeniable, a gentle fire chasing away years of cold loneliness. It was a feeling she hadn't felt in a long, long time, a feeling of being truly cherished, truly desired for who she was, not in spite of her strength, but because of it. Silas remained still, his patience a quiet comfort. He didn't rush her, didn't press for an answer. He simply waited, his gaze unwavering, full of the same respect and admiration he had shown from the moment he arrived. He understood that this wasn't just a question, but a profound moment for her. Alara thought of the whispers in town, the frightened glances, the cruel jokes. She thought of the long, silent nights in her cabin, the empty chair across from her own. She had grown accustomed to her solitude, accepting it as her fate. But now here was Silas, offering her a hand not to lead her but to walk beside her. He saw her as a partner, an equal, someone whose strength was an asset, not a burden. You truly see me?" She finally managed to whisper, her voice rough with emotion, barely audible. It was a question she hadn't dared to ask herself, let alone another living soul. Silas nodded, his smile tender. "I do, Alara. I see all of you, the woman who works tirelessly, the woman who fights fiercely, and the woman with a kind heart. I see it all and I admire it." His words settled over her like a soft, warm blanket. They were the words she had longed to hear, words that affirmed her worth, that celebrated her unique spirit. The loneliness that had been a constant companion began to recede, replaced by a blossoming hope. This wasn't just a proposal of marriage. It was an offering of companionship, of understanding, of a shared life built on respect. She felt a connection to him that was deep and true, something forged not from desperation, but from a quiet recognition of kindred spirits. She knew in that moment that this was what true love felt like, being seen, being understood, and being wanted for exactly who you are. The quiet hum of the prairie seemed to hold its breath as Alara looked at Silas. His words, "I see all of you," resonated deep within her, a melody she hadn't heard in years. The warmth in her chest grew, chasing away the last lingering chill of loneliness. For so long she had braced herself against the world, expecting judgment or fear. But Silas offered acceptance, respect, and a love that honored her whole self. A small, shy smile, one that hadn't graced her lips in what felt like forever, began to form. It was a smile that reached her eyes, softening their intense gaze. "Yes, Silas," she said, her voice still a little husky with emotion but firm with conviction. "Yes, I will marry you." A genuine, joyful grin spread across Silas's face, lighting up his kind blue eyes. He took another step forward, this time gently extending his hand. Alara, without hesitation, placed her large, strong hand in his. His grip was firm and warm, a promise of shared burdens and shared joys. It wasn't a weak grip, nor was it one trying to dominate, it was a grip of partnership. From that day forward, the two ranches became one. Alara and Silas worked side by side, their strengths complementing each other perfectly. Alara's immense power and tireless spirit were now matched by Silas's steady wisdom and gentle leadership. He never tried to change her, never asked her to be less than she was. Instead, he celebrated her unique qualities, her ability to lift heavy beams, to calm a spooked horse with a single touch, to mend a broken tool with ease. The town, though still a little wary, slowly began to change its tune. Seeing Alara and Silas together, a team of equals began to chip away at their old prejudices. They saw Silas, a respected man, treating Alara with profound love and admiration. This new reality forced them to see Alara not as a fearsome anomaly, but as a strong, capable woman who had found her rightful place. Alara found a happiness she had thought was lost forever. With Silas, she could be herself fully and completely. She laughed more easily, her deep chuckle echoing across the fields. She found her voice, sharing her thoughts and dreams with the man who truly listened. She was loved not for a softened version of herself, but for her formidable strength, her quiet wisdom, and the fierce heart that beat within her. The Wyoming wind still whipped around their combined ranch, but now it sang a different tune, a song of two lives joined, strong and true. Ilara, the massive widow once mocked and feared, had found not just a husband, but a partner who saw her true dignity. She was loved, and in that love she was truly happy, finally at peace, knowing her strength was not a curse, but a cherished part of who she was.